I'm Morgan Jorgensen, Senior Manager of Donor Relations for the Truman Library Institute, and it is my pleasure to host this evening's program, Medicare at 60, an evening with Clifton Truman Daniel and Luci Baines Johnson. I hope some of you were able to join us at the Truman Library today for our festivities commemorating Medicare. We had the first 2 Medicare cards ever issued to Harry and Bess on display, and we also hosted a free public healthcare event where the community had access to ACA and Medicare navigators. If you weren't able to join us at the Truman Library, I'm glad you're with us this evening. 60 years ago today, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed Medicare and Medicaid into law at the Truman Library in Independence, Missouri. It remains one of the most monumental days in Truman Library history and marked a key milestone in American life and public health. 6 decades on, these safety net programs constitute a living legacy currently available to every American citizen. Why did President Johnson choose the Truman Library? And what made healthcare a leading cause for both Johnson and Truman? Here to answer those questions tonight and provide their personal insights into these 2 giants of American history are Luci Baines Johnson and Clifton Truman Daniel. Luci and Clifton, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you, Morgan. It's our joy to be here.
All right, I will let the 2 of you take it away.
Oh, that's dangerous. Luci, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I really appreciate it, and it's always good to see you. To start off, you and I have talked about this before. Start off telling the story was you originally thought that you might have been there for the signing of the Medicare Act.
Well, I think sometimes when we're told a story over and over, it becomes such a part of us that we think we may have been there from the very beginning when we were not. But my father told me he was going to Missouri to sign this momentous legislation into law. And as a young 18-year-old, I must admit, I asked her rather irreverently, why on earth are you going all the way out to Missouri to sign this legislation rather than in the Oval Office or in the Capitol or in the East Room? And my father looked at me with such disappointment. Why I, his own flesh and blood, couldn't understand that the only right thing to do was to go to Missouri. And he said to me, you know, Luci Baines, which is what he always called me when he found me a little bit wanting, which was not infrequent, I'm afraid. And he said, Luci Baines, I want to be remembered as someone who remembered who brought them to the dance. And President Truman walked onto this nation's conscience the whole concept that some sort of universal health care ought to be the right of every American. And so it is the only right thing for me to do, to go to Missouri and give that first Medicare card to President Truman and the second one to Mrs. Truman. And I would hope that you would understand now it's the right thing to do too. Needless to say, I did and I do. And I just got a message from my sister just a few minutes ago that she was at the Senate today meeting with Leader Schumer and Senator Coons and Senator Blumenthal and a host of others, Democrats who are presenting to the Senate their intention to right the injustice of recent weeks, to reverse all that Medicare and Medicaid did for us in too many ways, and to once again answer the American people, their needs for some form of healthcare assurance.
And I was asked recently what my grandfather would have thought of these recent cuts, these recent rollbacks. And he actually said that he could not understand why people would oppose something like this. He couldn't understand why people who had health care, who could afford health care, would oppose extending it to people less fortunate. And that day on the stage at the Truman Library 60 years ago, you can see that he and my grandmother were smiling. They were both delighted that your father and your mother had come to the Truman Library and given them those first two cards, that your father had finally been able to do what he spent more than 7 years trying to do but could not accomplish.
Well, it surely, their faces lit up the room like the sun had come up that very day and was going to shine on and on and on in their smiles. Today is a very fortuitous day for us to be speaking, for me personally, because 1 year ago today, my husband suffered a near fatal heart attack. And it's been a struggle, both in terms of time, talent, and treasure coming back. But he's made remarkable, remarkable achievements. And I cannot bear to think of what it would have been like for him to have faced this without the support of Medicare. And I can't imagine the burden that so many people have to bear because of the recent legislation and the great big bill that is frightening them, that these sorts of opportunities that they had counted on, they believed for the last 60 years would belong to their families, is now being so dangerously diminished.
And I have not. I'm glad Ian is on the path to recovery. That's good news. I've had my own experiences with Medicare. When I turned 65, I went on Medicare. I had been on my previous employer's health plan before that. For a year and a half before Polly turned 65 and could go on Medicare, I paid her health care premium, which for a year and a half ate up a big chunk of my pension. So my pension went straight into paying for her health care. It was so expensive. Now that we are both on Medicare, as I said earlier, I'm not going to run out and buy a yacht, but at least that the two of us can sleep at night knowing that we have reasonably priced, good health care.
Well, my father was inspired by many things to pursue the cause of Medicare and Medicaid, but amongst them was the man who succeeded him in the United States Congress. Homer Thornberry had a mother and a father who were deaf mutes, and his father was deceased, but his mother lived with Homer and Eloise and their children, and she had a good deal of medical problems. And Homer was telling Daddy that he was really being faced with whether he sent his children to college or he took care of his elderly mother in these most stressful days. And as a United States Congressman, he didn't know how he was going to be able to meet both moral obligations. And Daddy felt, that's just not right. And it wasn't some subject that was esoteric. He could see it in the eyes and the frustration and the worries of a man that he loved dearly, who was serving in the Congress trying to do the people's service. So Medicare, Medicaid, they are subjects that are not simply kind of ones that are remote. You see them every day in your own life and the lives of countless people across this fruited plain. And the right to decent education and to decent health care just should be a part of the American promise, not just for those of privilege, but for all of us. And I think that that's kind of the remarkable thing about Harry Truman and Lyndon Johnson. They were both catapulted into the presidency unexpectedly. The presidents they had served had both been extremely charismatic folks. The deaths were unanticipated, and they have followed the folks that were not only charismatic, but were very affluent. And here, these two public servants of very humble means and backgrounds became the president of the United States in the most taxing, difficult job that there is in the entire world. And they really empathized with each other. They felt they understood each other. They felt each other's journey had been one that they respected and appreciated. So it's so right for us to be visiting here today. Harry Truman's grandson and a member of the Johnson family to discuss this very special day, this very special American promise made possible because two men cared enough to give all that they could to make this dream come true for all of us.
Well, and your father essentially carried it out for my grandfather. For Grandpa, healthcare was just part of the fair deal. You spoke earlier about the presidents before them, FDR and JFK. Grandpa, of course, inherited the White House from President Roosevelt, and the fair deal, the New Deal pulled us out of the Depression. The fair deal was my grandfather's attempt to help the country out of war, to get back to full employment, health care, housing, all of the things that make life comfortable, make work possible, make the country stronger. So he put those all together in a package, but he could not get it passed primarily, frankly, the American Medical Association, which lobbied hard against it, and could not get it past a Republican-controlled Congress. And I was asked just recently, how did LBJ manage to do what my grandfather could not? What had changed? What was the climate like for your father that was, if it was, different than it was for my grandfather?
Well, I have been told that my father met with the president of the American Medical Association and others in their organization. And he was there to thank them for all the support that they had been giving to our sons and daughters serving in Vietnam. And he said to them something along the lines of, I am here to tell you personally, up front and close, how grateful your president is because you are willing to literally go lend your lives to the support. Oh, good heavens, I'm so sorry. That was my sister. Can you turn off that phone? I think she's trying to tell me about what's just happened in Washington, D.C. And I thought I'll visit with her later about that. But so he was speaking to the head of the AMA and thanking them for their support. And he said to them, I have no doubt that if you're willing to go give your lives for your country, you certainly would do abroad. You certainly would want to do that at home for all your fellow citizens who need your support so desperately. And that was sort of, I guess, what they call the Johnson treatment. But he did it in a very public way and in a format where others were watching. And I guess the time had kind of come where it was obvious that this was the right thing to do. And the fact that we were able to get it done is something that I will be grateful for as long as I draw breath.
Oh, and something that my grandparents were grateful for as long as they drew breath after that with those first two cards. I don't know what the number on yours is, but mine is, 5,558,000. We've been going for 60 years now. But my grandfather and my grandmother were grateful for your for his work with this. Grandpa, in facing off at the AMA, as I said earlier, just couldn't understand it. And I don't recall really what his tactics were. He tried to put together a bill. He tried several different times. And what one of the catchphrases that the AMA was using was socialized medicine. They were scaring people that we were going down the socialist road, which many people, I think, in the 40s and 50s equated with communism as well. But my grandfather said, it is not socialized medicine. I'm not in favor of socialized medicine. Socialized medicine is owned by the state, run by the state. You don't get to choose your doctors. You have to go where you're told to. He wanted people to be able to choose their doctors, choose their hospitals, and he wanted it managed locally by states, by hospitals themselves. So it was it's much like the insurance programs that we have today, but always very grateful that your dad got that over the line.
And it's so ironic that we're learning that this present legislation is going to impact the rural folks in this country, the people that your father and my father are so associated with, and that rural hospitals are going to be threatened with extinction, and the ability to provide services are going to be so remote to many who don't have the transportation and the capability to get to where the services are provided, and are going to then need to go to emergency rooms where healthcare services are so very much more expensive. And all of this is increasing the national debt. It's so sad. And it's something that we can prevent. And so I'd like to take my hats off to Senator Schumer and to Senator Coons and Senator Blumenthal and all the rest of the Senate who are trying to rally the country's conscience one more time and say Medicare and Medicaid matter. They're the right thing to do for the American people. And we are going to be a part of the solution. We're not going to add to the problem.
I think it was, I want to say it was FDR, and I'm going to get the quote wrong, but that a nation can truly be judged on how well it takes care of the least of its citizens, the citizens who can't afford medical care, the citizens who need help. So
well, it's also Christ who said, "The least of these, my brethren," and so I think we have a lot of good role models that say it's important to take care of each other.
Now I feel I've mixed up Franklin Roosevelt and Jesus Christ.
Well, I think there are a lot of folks who did.
Well, but just as an aside to all of this, you were talking about the similarities between your father and my grandfather, and there were kindred spirits in many ways. It's been a relationship, though, that our families, my family particularly, has enjoyed for a long time. And just as an aside on one story, and I think you've heard this, I think they only had one hiccup in their relationship, and that was when after your father won the presidency in his own right in 1965, your mother called my grandmother and said, "Mrs. Truman, we would like to rehang your official portrait in the White House, but we can't find it." And my grandmother said, "That's because it's on my wall." And your mother said, you can't do that. That belongs to the American people." And my grandmother said, "The heck it does. It's a picture of me, and it's on my wall, and that's where it's going to stay." Your mother had obviously read Sun Tzu's The Art of War and knew when not to engage, and backed off and called the artist, Greta Kempton, and commissioned her to paint two copies. One is in the White House collection. The other is on the wall of the Truman Library in Independence, Missouri, but the original is still on my grandmother's wall. They never did, but that was the only, I think the only drawback in a very long and comfortable and rewarding friendship. And your father used to call my grandfather when he was in office, when LBJ was in office. He used to call my grandfather every once in a while, just to chat, or just to bring him up to date.
Well, I think that my father had an opportunity to go and speak to President Eisenhower and to your father and recognize that the presidents who had gone before him understood as no one else could the burden of the presidency. And Daddy, I was speaking with a friend of my father's, a man who had served in the Johnson administration last night. And he said he had gone with my father on occasions where he had met both President Eisenhower and President Truman. And Daddy had indicated that he really admired President Eisenhower and really appreciated his service to the country and really liked him. But there was no doubt that when he got into the presence of President Truman, his eyes lit up because he really loved the man. I think that they just felt they understood each other and that they could support each other in ways that few could. I'd like to also share a story, if I might, about a Christmas card that I wrote to your grandparents. I wrote a jillion Christmas cards, it seems, before we left the presidency. And on the back of those cards, I put little notes, as many of us do, to loved ones, saying, dear Aunt Susie, this has happened to me in the past year and wondering how you were doing, and that kind of just commentary, trying to bring each other up to date. And so on the back of the Christmas card to your grandparents, I wrote to them saying how deeply grateful I would always be as Lyndon Johnson's daughter for the consolation and the comfort and the strength that they had brought my father as no one else really could, because they understood his journey. And I hope, because the Christmas card was taken in front of the White House with my son in my arms, that maybe one of the volunteers who were handling the Christmas cards, because I knew your grandparents didn't have any staff to do that, that maybe they might recognize it. Maybe that card might get put in front of your grandparents. Well, not long afterwards, I received a handwritten note from your grandmother, thanking me for the note that I had sent on the back of my Christmas card. And I think that's the kind of relationship that generations of Johnsons and generations of Truman have had. That's the kind of respect and love. It hangs on my wall today in the next room. And I will treasure it as long as I'm around.
You you at least got a note. I got $5 every Christmas, and that was pretty much it. In one of those little see-through cards where you could see Abraham Lincoln's face. Um, I, for me, and I was very young at the time, but I really liked your parents, and the first time I met them, and you know this story because actually the story ends with you. I met your parents the day after your father's inauguration in 1965. My parents had taken us to Washington for the festivities. We were standing in for my grandparents, whom your parents invited, but they were, I think, 81 and 80 that year, and they didn't want to make the trip. So my mother was designated to represent the family, and she did. And on the morning after the inauguration, we all went over to the White House to have breakfast with your parents before getting on a train back to New York. And of course, in those days, when you traveled by train or plane, you dressed up. We had on coats and ties and long pants and the whole 9 yards, and our hair was spit shined. And Mom was very, very grumpy about all this, getting us all set to go. And we got to the second floor of the White House, and your mother greeted us. And I've said this publicly before, and I'll apologize for saying it again. She greeted us in her pajamas. Every hair in place and her makeup was perfect. She looked like she'd been standing by the elevator waiting for us all night. And we sat down in the West Sitting Hall, and I had a paper to write. I was in second grade, and my teacher let me off school and said, you got to write about this. And your father, of course, being the President of the United States, knew that. And he came out and he sat down. He went right past my parents, and he sat down in front of me and my brother William and said, I understand that you have a paper to write. You're going to need proof that you were here. And he went into his office and he got everything he could find that had his name on it: pens, paper, stationery, envelopes, anything that said Lyndon Johnson, President of the United States. And he brought this whole mess out and he started dividing it up between me and William. And he got to the end of this, and your mother reached across he started to hand us something else. Your mother reached across the table and snatched something out of his hand and said, Lyndon, for God's sake, you cannot give them those. He tried to give us each a book of White House matches. I was 7, Will was 5. Probably not a good idea. And years later, and there are two parts of this story, both of which you were present for, when I wrote a book about some of these things, and I spoke at the Johnson Library in Austin. You were there with some of your children and your mother. And I told that story, and I thought, oh, Mrs. Johnson's going to kill me because I'm telling a pajama story on her. She's not going to like that at all. And we went up to the top floor of the library, and we had dinner afterwards with you and the whole family and your mother. And she tapped on her glass at the beginning, and she said, I'd like to give Clifton a little something this evening for coming to speak to us. And I thought, she might have a ruler under there, and she's going to whack me across the knuckles for telling that story. Because she said, hold out your hand. And I did, and into it, she dropped 2 books of matches. Now, at the time, all she could get at that time were LBJ Ranch matches. I still have them. And it was, I think, 5 years ago that you very kindly came to Kansas City and did a program with me and Mark Updegrove down on the plaza in Kansas City. And at the end of that, I told that story at the end of that program, you gave me LBJ matches. I finally got my LBJ President of the United States matches, along with some pens, I think. So
Yes.
thank you for that. But you and I spoke about this briefly the other day, at my grandfather's funeral. I had such affection for your father and your mother, but such affection for him that he was not well at that point, but you can tell this story, he insisted on coming. But I remember when I saw him and I noticed that I was looking forward to seeing him, but when I did, I was heartbroken that he didn't look well and he was not himself. So
No, he wasn't. And everybody around him knew that. And therefore, folks urged him not to go to Missouri because it was cold and it was long and it was arduous trip and for my father and under the circumstances. And he said something to the effect of to me, Luci, Harry Truman was there for me every time I needed him. It is only right that I go to be there for his funeral and let the world know just how important this man was to our country and was to this president. I'm going. Are you? And I was privileged to be able to share that event. That was one I got to go to.
they actually have pictures of that one.
Exactly. That was one that I was actually able to verify that I had been there, but I would never have forgotten it for anything in the world because it was a very moving experience to witness to extraordinary men who had come from very humble circumstances, who had given their all to this country as their president, be able to witness each of those men's services to our country, and to be able to share in that historic event and that historic relationship.
It was. As I understand it, not all ex-presidents talk to each other.
Well, theirs was something very special, and this day is something very special. And I am just thrilled to death to hear from my sister, even though she called me as we were speaking, to share with me firsthand her excitement about the fact that there are those who are not going to give up the fight for the justice of decent health care being an opportunity for every American.
Well, and I know that Mr. Schumer and company, even on the Democratic side, the Senate and the House have access to good health care during and after they leave office. So they are privileged to receive this, and it is
Only right that they make sure that all the rest of us
yeah.
can.
Yes, it's only if you can take care of yourself, take care of others, because it does make us stronger. It makes the country stronger. It makes all of us better. Do we want to, at this point, Morgan, if you are still there, do we want to take some questions?
I am still here and I would love to read you some questions. We already have a few, but I will tell everybody else that if you have a question for Clifton and Luci about Medicare, about their parents, grandparents, you can add it to the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And if you see a question that you would like to have answered, you can go ahead and press the little thumbs up button to move it to the top of the list. So we're going to start with a question from John, who points out for us that LBJ was in the House of Representatives and then later in the Senate when Truman was trying to get his national health care plan passed by Congress. Do either of you know what Johnson's support or attitude towards Truman's proposal was? Did he advocate for it? Anything? Any memories there?
Well, you're talking about memories that took place before my time.
Sure.
I
should clarify. Yes, not memories, but maybe stories that were told. I don't want to insult anyone.
I was born in 1947, and to be thoroughly frank with you, I can't speak specifically to what my father did, but I know that it was his strong belief that healthcare ought to be the right of the American people, and in the end, he was able to get that accomplished only because Harry Truman had awakened our nation's conscience to its importance.
Yeah, and even at that time, and I'm talking about Grandpa's time, even at that time in 1945, when he first started proposing this, only 1 in 4 Americans were against it. So you had the majority of the population who thought it was a good idea. Never mind what the AMA or others thought. And I'm fairly sure that President Johnson would have been a yay vote on all of that.
All right, we'll go to our next question, which is from Barbara. And Barbara asks, did either your parents or grandparents talk about what Medicare meant to them in terms of their access to it and their care later in life? Did they talk about what that meant to them personally to be able to use that program?
Well, I can just tell you that Lyndon Johnson was just as proud of it as he could be, and grateful to have its support. And so have my sister was in a nearly fatal house fire several years ago at Christmas time, and she has fought the good fight with a level of courage and strength and dignity that I will never be able to imagine existing in my own life. Hers was phenomenal. But also would the bill have been if she had not had the benefit of Medicare? She was on a ventilator for 7 months. And she's come back and she's thriving and she's doing well. And she was at the Senate today. So we all have family stories. They affect each one of us. And we have family members who are on Medicaid, whose economic incomes are such that it has proven invaluable to their children. And as the access of healthcare would have unfortunately not been possible. So we really salute the wonderful work of Harry Truman and Lyndon Johnson, and now Speaker Schumer and Senator Coons and Senator Blumenthal and all that are supporting this legislation, because it shouldn't be a privilege. It should be a right of every American.
Agreed. And I don't have any memories of obviously of my grandparents, and that I was born after Grandpa was out of the White House. But my grandparents, I know for sure, talked about health constantly. Family members' health. My grandmother was always on my grandfather. Are you eating right? Are you getting enough rest when they were apart? So this was a very important topic for them. And I told you this the other day, Luci, but Linda came with a group of other descendants to visit us at the Truman Library last June. And as part of our tour, we went to see the World War I Memorial in Kansas City. And the memorial includes a very tall and very lovely tower that you take an elevator up most of the way, but then the last bit, and it's a couple of 3 stories, the last bit is up a spiral staircase, so you can go to the observation deck on the top of the tower and look out over all of Kansas City. And Linda was still recovering a bit, but she was game for it all. And at one point I turned around, I think she was using a cane at that point, and I turned around and I said, "Where did Linda? Did we lose her?" And one of the other descendants said, "No, she's ahead of you. She made it up the top of the tower first."
Well, she's always been ahead of me, and I admire her. I have no doubt that it was the care and competency of many good healthcare professionals, as well as a lot of prayer that and just will and courage on my sister's part that got her to the remarkable place she is in life today. But she is only one. There are countless Americans who have been able to be productive and worthy citizens whose lives would have been ruined if they hadn't had the access to Medicare, for their lives, for them personally, or their lives for their family members or friends. And our economy, the millions of dollars that are wasted in our economy because people can't be productive workers. They have to stay home and take care of their parents. And just the costs to an economy are huge when healthcare isn't provided for its people.
Well, and that brings up something, if I may, before we go to the next question. One of the things that spurred my grandfather to push for universal health care was the fact that during World War II, when this country was in a serious crisis, to put it mildly, fully 30% of, I think it was more than 30% of the draftees or inductees or volunteers were unfit for military duty. And there was, I think, more than 1 million during the war who had to leave the service, not because they were wounded, but because their health would not allow them to continue. He was appalled that in a country as rich and intelligent and scientifically advanced as ours, that so many people were too unhealthy to serve the country in the military.
Well, let us all hope and pray that today is the beginning of the rest of the hope that Medicare has provided to so many of us and will be provided for generations to come. Let's hope that today will be our turnaround.
I think we all hope that, Lucy. We have an anonymous attendee who pointed out that civil rights is something that united both Truman and Johnson. They were both aligned and had heavy hands in. Did the civil rights movement have any influence on the passage or attempted passage of these programs?
Well, civil rights was certainly my father's pride and joy, and something justice mattered to Lyndon Johnson. Justice mattered to Harry Truman, and your ability to enjoy the fruits of this country shouldn't be dependent upon the color of your skin, just as your access to decent health care shouldn't depend upon the depths of your pocketbook. We should be able to be a healthy nation. We should be able to provide all of our opportunities to all of our people, regardless of the color of their skin or their gender or their ethnicity. This is America's promise. We're a country of immigrants. We're a country that says from the very beginning, let's pick us up by the bootstraps. Let's become a better people. Let our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren have more opportunity than we did. That was just who Harry Truman and Lyndon Johnson were.
Lucy, that is beautiful, and I'm sure that Clifton would agree if a transformer in his neighborhood had not just blown and he lost Wi-Fi, which is why we lost him. But I think that is a wonderful, beautiful note to end on of hope and the right direction for our country. Is there any other parting thoughts you would like to leave us with?
Well, I think the parting thought I would like to give is that Lyndon Johnson loved Harry Truman, and they both loved this country, and they both believed in justice for all. And I hope that all of us Americans will do all that we can to provide that sort of equal opportunity in civil rights, in healthcare, in education, to all of our people, because it is, as Daddy said, the right thing to do.
Lucy, thank you so much for being here and sharing these special memories with us tonight. Thanks to Clifton as well. You both did an excellent job, and we're so appreciative of you spending the 60th anniversary with the Institute.
One final thought.
Of course.
I got an interruption from a phone call from my sister who was so excited.
Yes.
Clifton had a transformer blow in his community. We have had our challenges tonight. We're all united in the fact that we're not going to let this destroy an evening that means a lot to all of us. And we hope that we've been able to provide something for the Truman Library and those who've come to visit that is worthwhile for them as well.
Beautifully said, Lucy, and thank you again. You were wonderful this evening, and I know our crowd appreciates you very much. Oh dear, I think I've made the same mistake in my share here. Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and special thank you to Clifton and Lucy for sharing their memories. Don't miss our next event commemorating the 80th anniversary of victory in Japan. We will be joined by Evan Thomas in discussion about his book, Road to Surrender: 3 Men and the Countdown to the End of World War II. Learn more and RSVP at trumanlibraryinstitute.org. As a reminder, membership and visitation at the Truman Library is free year-round to our members. You can learn more about membership and plan your visit to the Truman Library today at trumanlibraryinstitute.org. Thank you again, everyone, for tuning in and supporting President Truman's legacy. Good night, and stay true.